Some crimes are so harrowing, so unfathomably dark. They challenge your very belief in humanity. While the world is largely composed of decent people, certain events serve as chilling reminders that danger can lurk just beneath the surface. What happened to Jenna Burley was one such event, an unthinkable tragedy that reverberated across an entire university, leaving a community shattered and grief-stricken. Social gatherings and alcohol can often act as accelerants for danger, especially in environments where safety is already compromised. In cities with fragile infrastructures and high crime rates, one misstep can lead to irreversible consequences. In Jenna's case, that fatal misstep came in the form of a single night out, one that would end in devastation, fueled by a combination of neglect, vulnerability, and cruelty. Jenna Burley entered the world on November 4, 1994, in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania's state capital. She was born into a warm and devout Catholic household, the cherished daughter of two college sweethearts. From her earliest days, Jenna radiated kindness. Her heart beat not only for the well-being of animals but for humanity as a whole. She immersed herself in volunteer projects, giving selflessly and expecting nothing in return. To those who knew her, Jenna was a beacon of joy, a bright, compassionate, and spirited young woman. In August 2013, having completed high school, Jenna embarked on a new chapter at Temple University in Florida. The move opened doors to academic and social opportunities, and Jenna embraced them all with fervor. She quickly built strong friendships, became active in women's advocacy groups, and dedicated herself to championing gender equality. Though excited by her independence, she never lost touch with her roots. Her bond with her family remained steadfast, and she visited home often, especially during the winter months when she returned to one of her favorite pastimes, snowboarding. But life would soon test her resolve in the most painful of ways. At 19, Jenna suffered a catastrophic leg injury during a snowboarding accident. The damage was severe and required invasive surgery, including the insertion of metal plates and pins. What followed was a grueling period of rehabilitation marked by physical pain and emotional strain. Jenna returned to campus that summer with high hopes for healing, but complications arose. She found herself back in the hospital, this time facing the reality of life in a wheelchair. This period was one of profound transformation. Jenna, once active, fiercely independent, and always on the move, had to grapple with the limits imposed on her body. And yet, rather than retreat, she opened up. She began chronicling her experiences through a blog, sharing not just the trials of her recovery, but reflections on life, personal growth, and societal issues. Her words were raw, honest, and powerful. She became an inspiration to others, proving that strength isn't about physical ability. It's about resilience of spirit. In 2015, she pursued a long-held dream, creating and selling handmade designer necklaces. She launched a modest online store and, true to her nature, donated a portion of the proceeds to charitable causes. But behind the scenes, Jenna was quietly fighting demons few could see. The trauma of her injury had left scars deeper than the physical ones. Her mental health began to deteriorate. Depression crept in. Anxiety became a constant shadow. Eventually, she sought professional help and was admitted to a psychiatric facility for treatment. Her struggles didn't remain hidden. Jenna used her blog as a platform to confront the stigma surrounding mental illness. She spoke candidly about her battles with depression, anxiety, and attention deficit disorder. These were not just personal admissions. They were acts of courage meant to connect with and uplift others facing similar pain. She refused to let her setbacks define her. With the help of loyal friends and an unbreakable will, Jenna completed her studies at a local college in 2015. The achievement marked a turning point. Reinvigorated and determined, she re-enrolled at Temple University in the fall of 2017, this time choosing to study film and media in Philadelphia. The move represented more than academic ambition. It was a bold step into a future she believed she could shape. But the city she now called home carried risks she couldn't foresee. Philadelphia, though vibrant and full of opportunity, bore a reputation for high crime. The university dorms offered a limited sanctuary, But beyond their doors lay a city where danger prowled freely, especially after dark. Caution was essential, yet in the excitement of student life, safety precautions were often overlooked. Within days of her arrival, Jenna encountered misfortune. During her very first week on the new campus, she was involved in a car accident. Thankfully, her injuries were minor, but fate, it seemed, was circling. The shadows were drawing near, and Jenna Burley was about to face something far more sinister than she could ever have imagined. The injuries from the car accident, though not life-threatening, rattled everyone, especially her father. Without hesitation, he rushed to Philadelphia to support his daughter. It was Wednesday, August 30th, 2017. Jenna was shaken but resilient. Determined not to let the accident dampen her spirits, she planned to attend classes the next morning as scheduled. That same evening, a birthday celebration was in the works for her roommate, Davis Traynor. It happened to fall on one of Temple University's rowdiest traditions, Wild Wednesdays. Wild Wednesdays had become a cultural phenomenon among students. A weekly ritual of bar hopping and partying, it offered a kind of escapism, a raucous break from the pressures of academic life. The streets near campus pulsed with youthful energy as students poured into bars, eager to indulge in the reckless freedom the night promised. Jenna, still new to this world, had never fully experienced the unfiltered chaos of these midweek revelries. After months of physical recovery and emotional healing, she was ready to let go, to celebrate life once more. Her father, recognizing his daughter's excitement, spent the early evening with her at a quiet restaurant. He wanted to be close, to offer his presence without being intrusive. After dinner, he dropped her off with friends for the party, choosing to spend the night in a nearby hotel. It was a gesture of love, letting his daughter enjoy her youth without hovering. Jenna and her friends started the night by visiting several bars. The last stop was a bustling sports bar close to campus, a popular spot known for its crowded dance floor and thunderous energy. The venue overflowed with students caught in the frenzy of celebration. Among them was Davis, the birthday girl, who reunited briefly with Jenna at the bar. They chatted and shared a laugh before parting ways shortly before midnight. Davis assumed they'd meet up again before the night ended. But that reunion never happened. Jenna vanished. Around 2 a.m., as the bar dimmed its lights and the music faded, patrons filtered out onto the city's streets. Jenna was left behind, alone. The crowd dispersed, unaware that something was deeply wrong. When Davis returned to the dorm and crawled into bed, he fully expected to hear from Jenna within the hour. Instead, what he received chilled him to the bone. Waking in the early hours of the morning, Davis glanced at his phone. Several messages lit up the screen. They were from Jenna. One stood out, a plea for help. The panic set in immediately. He responded at once, but there was no reply. The message remained unread. Jenna was nowhere to be found. The bar had closed. The streets were quiet. In theory, Jenna could have hailed a taxi or called a ride, even if intoxicated. But her silence was unnatural. Something was wrong. Desperately, Davis reached out to others who had been with Jenna that night. But most were asleep. Others had assumed Jenna had simply gone her own way, unaware she had been left behind entirely. One by one, the conversations painted a grim picture. Jenna had been left alone at the bar, abandoned in a city known for its violence and unpredictability after dark. Davis's fear deepened into dread. He knew how dangerous those streets could be. He didn't wait. He called Jenna's parents. Jenna's father, still in town, was gripped by a sinking feeling. As minutes turned to hours with no word from his daughter, he sprang into action. He combed the streets, retracing the route between the bar and the campus, hoping to spot her, to find any sign of where she might have gone. But she was nowhere. She had vanished into the night. At 9 a.m. the next morning, he contacted campus security. It was a desperate attempt to enlist help in finding Jenna before it was too late. But what he received in return was indifference cloaked in protocol. Officers dismissed the urgency, citing the usual student behavior during Wild Wednesdays. To them, Jenna's absence was more likely a drunken misadventure than a true emergency. Students, they said, often disappeared overnight during party events and typically turned up safe and sound the next day. With bureaucratic coldness, they advised Jenna's family to wait. "Give it a day," they said. "She'll probably be back." But every passing second brought them closer to a truth no parent should ever have to confront. As the sun rose higher, those 24 hours stretched into an agonizing eternity, the longest and most terrifying day of their lives. The Burleigh family found themselves gripped by a nightmare they couldn't escape. Jenna's father clung to the hope that his daughter would walk through the door or call at any moment. But the hours passed in tormenting silence. The next morning, still without any word from Jenna, he once again contacted campus security, this time with a growing sense of urgency that could no longer be ignored. This time, the response was different. Finally acknowledging the gravity of the situation, security began to act. Their first step was to review footage from surveillance cameras across the campus. What they discovered confirmed every parent's worst fear. Jenna Burleigh had never made it back to her dorm that night. She had vanished somewhere off campus, outside the protective bounds of university property and beyond the jurisdiction of campus police. The case was immediately escalated. Local law enforcement was called in. Now, the search for Jenna was no longer a matter of protocol. It was a race against time. Officers began by interviewing the students who had spent the evening with Jenna. Bit by bit, they reconstructed the events of that night, piecing together her final known movements. Witnesses described her appearance, what she was wearing, how she seemed emotionally. It became clear that Jenna had disappeared after leaving the bar, a space well outside university oversight. The authorities now faced the grim task of determining where she had gone, and who she had left with. One detail stood out. Jenna had sent a message asking for help. It hadn't been detailed. It didn't name anyone or describe a threat, but it was a cry, a quiet, desperate signal that something was wrong. The fact that it had gone unnoticed and unanswered chilled investigators. Every minute lost could mean a life slipping further from their grasp. Using data from Jenna's cell phone, detectives were able to determine the last location it had been active, sometime around 2 a.m., inside the same bar where her friends had last seen her. It was from there that the text for help had been sent. That's where the trail went cold. Investigators rushed to the bar to retrace her steps. Staff were interviewed. One bartender immediately recognized Jenna's photograph. He remembered her being there that night, alone, distant, and clearly upset after her friends had left. She seemed distracted, checking her phone repeatedly, as though waiting for someone to respond. The responses never came. Then something changed. At about 1:30 a.m., a man approached her, athletic build, late 20s. He spoke softly to her, then sat beside her. They ordered drinks, exchanged words. There were no signs of hostility, no obvious danger. Just two people sitting at a table as the night wore down. By 2 a.m., the bar was closing. According to the bartender, the man left first. Jenna followed shortly after, appearing to go with him voluntarily. Perhaps she trusted him. Perhaps she simply didn't want to be alone. Perhaps she believed she would be walked back safely to the dorm. In her vulnerable state, she might not have seen any other option. Surveillance footage confirmed the bartender's account. The man had not forced her to leave. There was no struggle, but that did not ease the growing concern. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. This man had been the last person to see Jenna alive. Then came the breakthrough. One of the bartenders recognized the man. A name surfaced, Joshua Hupperders. He was a regular at the bar. The staff member even had his contact information. That single lead turned the tide of the investigation. Detectives immediately attempted to reach Joshua. The call rang unanswered. A voicemail was left, urging him to respond and informing him of Jenna's disappearance. Investigators now believed he might be the last person who had spoken to her, potentially a key witness, perhaps more. As police began searching for Joshua, they also expanded the scope of the investigation. Hospitals were contacted. Shelters were alerted. Every possible location where Jenna might have ended up was scrutinized. But no one had seen her. No one had heard from her. It was as though she had vanished into the night. Then Joshua returned the call. His voice was calm, almost casual. He apologized for the delay, claiming he had been drinking heavily and had spent most of the following day asleep. His explanation raised more questions than answers. Investigators, now more certain than ever that Joshua Hupperders was more than just a casual acquaintance from that night, prepared to take the next step. He wasn't just a name anymore. He was a person of interest, could barely piece together anything from that night. He claimed the alcohol had clouded his memory entirely. He couldn't recall where he'd gone, who he was with, or what had happened after leaving the bar. To the investigators, this was immediately suspect. When questioned about Jenna Burley, Joshua denied even knowing her. He insisted that he had no idea who they were referring to. But that claim directly contradicted the bartender's testimony and the surveillance footage. Joshua had been seen buying Jenna a drink, sitting with her, speaking quietly, and then leaving the bar just before she did. Investigators didn't buy his story. The bartender had been clear. Though the night involved drinking, no one was so intoxicated as to black out. Patrons were lucid, steady on their feet, and well aware of their surroundings. The idea that Joshua couldn't remember anything, especially after having an extended conversation with a woman who later went missing, was implausible at best and deceitful at worst. His denial, paired with his refusal to cooperate fully, raised every red flag imaginable. A deeper look into Joshua's life began to reveal unsettling details. He lived in a rented house just a short walk from the bar. The property had multiple rooms, each leased out to students and young professionals. Detectives believe Jenna might have been taken there after leaving the bar, whether by force or under false pretenses. The next logical step was to search his room, but the door was locked. Authorities contacted the landlady, who quickly arrived and granted them access. What they found inside was anything but routine. The room was in disarray, papers scattered, clothes strewn about. But it wasn't the mess that sent chills down the investigators' spines. Among the clutter were a pair of men's shoes, the heels stained with what appeared to be dried blood. Nearby sat a roll of toilet paper, marred with similar reddish stains. It was enough to suggest that something violent had occurred within those walls. But without a warrant, detectives had to halt their search. They secured the area and began the process of filing for permission to seize potential evidence. Time, however, was working against them. Joshua remained unreachable. Calls went unanswered. The urgency escalated. Investigators knew that waiting for a warrant could cost them precious hours, and they needed to know who they were dealing with. They turned to his background. Joshua Hupperders was born on February 27, 1988, making him nearly 7 years older than Jenna. His childhood had been marked by darkness. When he was just 4 years old, his father had been brutally murdered on the outskirts of Philadelphia. The crime was savage. His father's body discovered beaten, hands bound behind his back, stuffed into a trash bag and dumped like refuse. The case had never been solved. Such trauma leaves deep, lingering scars. Family members later revealed that Joshua had been profoundly affected by the murder. He grew up distrustful, guarded, and angry. His reluctance to work with police might have stemmed from the bitterness of never receiving justice for his father. But investigators weren't convinced that trauma alone explained his evasive behavior. There were darker possibilities. A search through Joshua's record revealed a string of offenses: drug possession, public intoxication, petty theft, and multiple DUIs. He was no stranger to law enforcement. Yet, notably, there were no previous charges of assault or violence. No glaring history that would have marked him as a predator. But that didn't mean he wasn't one. His record, while disturbing, didn't offer clear insight into what he might be capable of now. Meanwhile, Jenna's family was doing everything in their power to bring her home. Her parents distributed flyers throughout the city. Her name spread across student message boards and social networks. Friends and classmates joined in the search, canvassing neighborhoods, parks, hospitals, any place she could have ended up. But with every hour that passed, hope grew thinner. Then, on September 1st, a lead emerged. A young man named Jack Miley contacted the police. He was a friend of Joshua and lived in the room adjacent to his. That night, August 30th, He and Joshua had gone to the same bar together, planning to meet women. Jack had left before his friend, heading home around midnight with other students. The next morning, he awoke with a pounding hangover. But something else struck him, something he couldn't ignore. A sharp, acrid smell filled the air. It was the overwhelming scent of cleaning chemicals. Jack, groggy and disoriented, stepped into the hallway to investigate. And there he saw him, Joshua, standing in the hallway, silent, tense, and cleaning. Based on their suspicions and the growing mountain of inconsistencies, investigators took Joshua Hupperders into custody. His story had unraveled piece by piece, each lie peeling back a deeper layer of deceit. And now, standing before them, was not just a suspect, but a man who had gone to great lengths to conceal something horrific. It had all begun to fall apart the moment Jack Miley spoke up. That pungent scent of bleach filling the apartment hallway had been the first alarm. Jack had stumbled upon Joshua furiously scrubbing the kitchen floor, bleach soaking into the tiles, his demeanor tense, his explanation clumsy and poorly constructed. Scratches clawed down his neck, and a visible gash on his hand pulsed with fresh injury. Joshua brushed it all off as an accident, the result of a drunken fall into a thorny bush. He even made light of it, laughing off the blood and mess in the apartment as a side effect of his intoxicated blundering. But behind the forced grin was something darker. Later that day, Joshua claimed he needed medical attention and went to the hospital for stitches. Then, without warning, he announced to Jack that he was leaving town, headed for North Carolina to visit relatives. Jack had never heard of any out-of-state family before. It didn't sit right. The trip seemed sudden, evasive, and above all strategic. It wasn't until Jack saw Jenna Burley's face on the missing persons alert that the pieces began to click into place. The injuries, the bleach, the lies, the missing girl. It was all connected. And that's when Jack made the call to the police. Still, investigators couldn't dismiss the possibility that Jack himself might have been involved. He had been at the bar that same night. He lived just feet away from Joshua. His proximity to both the location and the suspect made him more than just a witness. He was now part of the investigation. The only way to fully understand what had happened was to find Jenna, and to get the truth out of Joshua. Authorities offered Jack an opportunity to try and reach out to Joshua, to coax a confession, or at least gather more information about where Jenna might be. But Joshua had vanished again, slipping through the cracks, avoiding phone calls, ignoring every attempt at contact. Then, on September 1st, a breakthrough. Joshua's cell phone connected to a network. Call was made, and this time he picked up. But instead of cooperating, he doubled down. He denied everything. He dismissed Jack's statements as lies and claimed he was still in South Philadelphia. He had no intention of traveling anywhere. When asked to come in for questioning, he agreed but never showed. Once again, he disappeared. That was the final straw. The FBI joined the search. The manhunt intensified. Through cell tower triangulation, agents tracked his phone activity. The truth emerged quickly. Joshua wasn't in South Philadelphia. He was far from it. He was hiding in the mountainous, wooded terrain of northeastern Pennsylvania. He had lied about everything. The trail led to a modest home near a mountain river, his grandmother's house. When agents arrived, they found Joshua there, calm, composed, still insisting he had no knowledge of Jenna Burley's disappearance. He claimed he was simply recovering from a stressful semester, seeking peace in nature. But investigators knew better. They knew he hadn't attended classes in months. He was on academic leave. There was no semester to recover from. His entire story was fiction. The physical evidence told its own story. The cuts, the lacerations, the stitched wounds along his back and hands. When asked to explain them, he offered another excuse. He said he'd broken a cereal bowl. But the wounds were too deep, too precise, too violent. These were not the marks of a domestic accident. These were signs of struggle. Joshua Hupperders was arrested on the spot. His grandmother was brought in alongside him as investigators began processing the crime scene. At the police station, a closer examination of Joshua's injuries revealed deep cuts, some fresh, others beginning to heal. Each one contradicted his increasingly feeble explanations. He had lied about knowing Jenna. He had lied about where he was going. He had lied about the injuries, the blood, and the bleach. Now, backed into a corner, his carefully constructed facade had collapsed. What remained was a trail of blood, deceit, and silence. And still no sign of Jenna. Suspect possessed considerable strength, allowing him to rupture the cable during the act of strangulation. A detail that spoke to the sheer force and rage behind the crime. With Joshua Hupperders in custody and the evidence mounting, investigators moved swiftly to secure a search warrant for his Philadelphia apartment. The grim task of cataloging what lay inside began. As expected, they found broken dishes and an overturned bowl of cornflakes, consistent with the suspect's claim about a domestic accident. But there were no traces of blood where he said there would be. Instead, what they uncovered painted a very different picture. Dark red stains, some faint, others more pronounced, were discovered across the apartment. Smeared in the kitchen sink, spattered inside the trash can, soaked into the fibers of the carpet, and worst of all, coating the blade of a large kitchen knife. Joshua had tried to clean to cover his tracks, but he had failed. The scene told a story of violence and panic, of a crime hastily obscured, not erased. On the floor, investigators found a black hair tie, clearly not Joshua's. It was a small item, easy to overlook, but one that suggested the presence of another person in the room, most likely Jenna. In addition to the physical evidence, police found a sizable quantity of controlled substances scattered throughout the apartment. It soon became clear that Joshua wasn't just a recreational user. He was supplying drugs to students on campus. It was an operation hidden behind the facade of a struggling university student. But even with these discoveries, Jenna's exact fate remained elusive. Then came the breakthrough investigators had been desperately searching for. In the bottom of a garbage can, buried beneath discarded waste, was a sweater. It was stained with blood. Investigators immediately recognized it. It matched the description of the clothing Jenna had worn on the night she vanished. When her parents were shown the garment, they confirmed the unbearable truth. It belonged to their daughter. That same day, police arrested Joshua Hupperders. As the news spread, people began coming forward. Classmates and neighbors described both Joshua and his roommate Jack as belligerent and aggressive, particularly toward women. Some had even witnessed disturbing incidents involving Joshua. Several recalled moments of verbal abuse, and one woman reported that he had once physically assaulted her during an argument. The narrative of a quiet, misunderstood man collapsed as the pattern of predatory behavior emerged. Then another call changed everything. A man contacted police and claimed Joshua had recently hired him to transport a heavy plastic container. He'd been paid $200 in cash for the job. According to the driver, the request came in the dead of night. Joshua and an unknown man had loaded the container into a vehicle and instructed him to drive roughly 150 kilometers to a rural address, Joshua's grandmother's home. At the time, the driver hadn't questioned the request too deeply. Joshua said the container held textbooks. But in the days following Jenna's disappearance, unease gnawed at the man's conscience. When he saw Joshua's face on the news, he called the police. As the investigation continued, another individual came forward, Joshua's cousin. He too had helped move the container. He'd heard the same excuse, schoolbooks and clothing. At the time, it hadn't raised alarms. But now, knowing what the police suspected, everything made sense. He had unknowingly helped transport a human body. The final call came from Joshua's grandfather. While cleaning the barn and checking for snakes, he stumbled upon something grotesque. A sealed plastic container, tucked away behind old equipment. Inside was the lifeless body of a young woman with dark hair. He contacted authorities immediately. Officers arrived at the rural property and made the heartbreaking discovery. It was Jenna Burley. The condition of her body was horrifying. The medical examiner would later confirm she had suffered no fewer than 140 injuries. It was a level of brutality that defied comprehension, evidence of a savage, prolonged attack. The trauma was extensive. The wounds were both defensive and offensive, suggesting she had fought with every ounce of strength she had. Joshua was confronted with the facts, but investigators deliberately withheld one critical detail: the location of Jenna's body. When questioned, he confirmed making the trip to his grandmother's home and admitted to transporting the plastic container, but denied any knowledge of what it contained. He offered no confession, no remorse, but the walls were closing in. He was formally charged with murder and evidence tampering. Even then, he refused to plead guilty. On September 3rd, the autopsy report was finalized. The cause of death was determined to be a combination of blunt force trauma and asphyxiation. Jenna had been beaten, likely with fists and blunt objects. A plate had been shattered against her skull. She had been strangled with a cord. A cable, ripped apart by the sheer force of the attack, was later recovered in Joshua's apartment. The coroner also found signs of a knife wound to the arm and a deep bite mark on her skin, as though the killer had descended into an uncontrollable frenzy of violence. It was a level of brutality that stunned even the most seasoned investigators. And now, with overwhelming forensic evidence, witness testimony, and a recovered body bearing unspeakable injuries, the truth of what happened to Jenna Burley could no longer be denied. The autopsy revealed the final, chilling details of Jenna Burley's final moments. Her larynx had been crushed, a violent injury consistent with prolonged strangulation. More disturbingly, traces of male biological fluid were found in her private areas, strongly indicating that she had been sexually assaulted. This evidence shattered any remaining illusions about the nature of the crime. What had begun as a night of celebration ended in an act of unspeakable brutality. Investigators continued their meticulous work, reviewing surveillance footage from around the neighborhood. Their efforts paid off. One camera, mounted on a building near Joshua Hupperter's rented apartment, captured a key moment. At 2:32 a.m., Jenna and Joshua were seen entering the building together, but only one of them would ever walk out again. The next day, Joshua was recorded hauling a large plastic container out of the apartment, the same container that would later be found in a shed on his grandparents' property, concealing Jenna's lifeless body. Then came a chilling discovery. A witness stepped forward, claiming to have heard piercing screams coming from Joshua's room that night. The cries lasted for about 3 agonizing minutes before suddenly going silent. No one intervened. No one called for help. The woman had screamed for her life, and the world outside her door remained silent. This testimony raised urgent questions. What about Jack, Joshua's roommate, who lived directly across the hall? Had he heard nothing? Was he a passive witness or something more sinister? When questioned, Jack insisted he had been severely intoxicated and was passed out. He claimed he never heard a thing. Investigators found no concrete evidence linking him to the crime, and in the absence of proof, Jack avoided charges. Still, the shadow of doubt lingered. The wheels of justice turned slowly. The trial did not begin until 2019. By then, forensic experts had confirmed that sexual intercourse had occurred shortly before Jenna's death. This introduced a new layer of horror to the case: the possibility of rape. Prosecutors believed the assault had not been consensual, that it was yet another violent act committed against her by a man who had already shown his capacity for cruelty. Joshua, in contrast, maintained that the encounter had been consensual. He claimed that after the intimacy, he suggested other sexual acts, which Jenna refused. According to his version, she became upset and attempted to leave. The prosecution, however, presented a different narrative, one that fit the brutal reality of the evidence. Jenna's refusal had triggered an argument. That argument had spiraled into violence. Joshua had lost control. He beat her. He strangled her. Then, in a final, horrifying act, he desecrated her body. There was no evidence that the two had known each other before that night. In court, Joshua's defense team mounted an aggressive campaign. They painted Jack, the roommate, as the true killer, suggesting that he had intervened during the conflict between Joshua and Jenna and had fatally attacked her. Joshua, they claimed, had merely helped cover it up to protect his friend. The strategy was desperate and hollow. There was no physical evidence linking Jack to the murder scene. And though Jack's past behavior raised concerns, he remained outside the reach of the prosecution. The defense also pointed to Joshua's level of intoxication. They argued that his judgment had been impaired, that alcohol had lowered his inhibitions and provoked an outburst he would not have committed while sober. But the jury saw through the excuses. This wasn't a single moment of drunken rage, it was a calculated cover-up. Joshua had not only murdered Jenna Burley, he had lied, concealed evidence, transported her body across state lines, and hidden her remains. During the trial, Joshua did admit partial guilt. He acknowledged destroying evidence and desecrating a corpse. But he continued to deny the most serious accusation, the murder itself. His refusal to fully accept responsibility only deepened the pain for Jenna's family, who had waited years for justice. Jack's sister took the stand to testify. She described her brother's frequent episodes of heavy drinking and how, during those times, he often slept so deeply that he couldn't be woken up. Her testimony reinforced the idea that Jack may have truly been unaware of what had happened just feet away. It was enough to keep him from being charged. After lengthy deliberations, the jury reached a decision. Joshua Hupperders was found guilty on all major counts: murder, sexual abuse, and tampering with evidence. The verdict was a condemnation not only of his actions, but of his efforts to deceive, manipulate, and evade responsibility. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. On top of that, he received an additional 18 years for the abuse of Jenna's body and the destruction of key evidence. His attorney attempted to appeal the conviction, alleging that police had violated protocol by entering Joshua's apartment without a proper warrant, claiming they had planted incriminating evidence. But the court found no merit in the appeal. The evidence was overwhelming. The investigation had been lawful. The sentence stood. Today, Joshua Hupperders remains behind bars, condemned to spend the rest of his life in prison. No appeal, no argument, no excuse can change the fact that he took a young, vibrant woman's life in a storm of senseless violence. For Jenna's family, justice came too late to save her, but it did, at last, deliver accountability.